I don't like that you're the brand of the Nerds Podcast on Letterboxd and that I'm just an afterthought. Like, you can also follow this dickhole over here if you want.
Welcome, nerds, to another episode of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast, a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses the culture through various segments. You, of course, can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Twitter and Instagram are both at the Nerds Podcast. You can check us out at Google Plus as well. Vote for us for Podcast of the Month. You can also check out our website, thenerdspodcast.com, where you can find our complete catalog. You can also find a feed to our YouTube channel. You can find our Letterboxd feed, which of course you can follow me at the Nerds Podcast. You can also follow my co-host, that Tyler Hunt. Of course, I'm with my co-host, as I always am, that Tyler Hunt. How's it going, man?
It's going well, man. I don't like that you're the brand of the Nerds Podcast on Letterboxd and that I'm just an afterthought. Like, you can also follow this dickhole over here if you want. But besides that, man, I'm good.
I think that's how I'm going to start introducing you when it's my episode to introduce. Oh, I'm just with this dickhole, that Tyler Hunt.
Per usual.
Yeah, per usual. I think we've actually had this conversation off recording before. I got introduced to Letterboxd from our buddy Matt Hurt from The Obsessive Viewer. He had just kind of sent me a link to it, and I signed up for it, and I thought it was really cool because basically it's a website to track the movies that you watch and make lists and stuff. Like, that was already something that we were already doing I did it on Evernote. And so this website and then eventually the app just made it so much easier to do that. And it was just it looked nicer than the random list I was making on Evernote. And so when I first signed up for it, I was like, well, this is just another way for me to pimp the podcast, because I'm always looking for new ways to pimp the podcast. And so I was like, oh, I'll just make it at the Nerds Podcast. And then I introduced you to it, and I kind of felt bad because I had already taken that slot.
No, I mean, it has your name on it, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, I make it pretty clear that it's me.
Yeah. I'm just giving you shit.
Oh, I know.
Yes. Yeah, I am a dickhole, though, for sure.
Like, even my little profile picture is just our logo. So
is mine is too. So
yeah.
You didn't know that, did you? You never look at my letterbox, do you?
I didn't know that. No, I have actually looked at your letterbox before, because every once in a while it'll pop up on my feed, because obviously I follow you. So yeah, I have looked at it. I don't use it as much as like a social media thing. I really just literally use it for my own purposes. Like, I don't use it for like I said, like a social media thing. It's more just keeping my lists that I would normally keep on Evernote.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy it. Like, I've went through a phase last year where I went through and I made like a lot of lists on there. Like, I know that you recently did your MCU list. I had done that a while ago, so I was first to that for sure.
I mean, all of my good ideas were just stolen from you.
No, but it's a fun app. It's a fun thing to have. I wish that there were more people on it and it was more interactive, I guess, because it seems like I think everybody uses it like that. You know, everybody wants to make their own lists and log their own movies, but it's fun. So if you don't have one, you should check it out.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, this episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Letterboxd. We basically just talked about it for the last three or 4 minutes.
I fucking wish.
Yeah, I mean, I wish they would sponsor us. But yeah. So let's just jump right into this particular episode. We start off each episode by kind of just checking in with each other. We call it what we're into. So what are you into this week?
It's funny because you and I were talking before we started recording just about some of the Funko Pops that we have in our collections, and we both were subscribers to Collector Core, which was like the Marvel Funko box brand, and we were talking about Loot Crate and all that stuff. And my thing for what I'm into, I guess, is kind of tied into that. I recently watched the new documentary called Making Fun, which I think came out Friday. You know, as our faithful listeners know, I've been trying to watch more documentaries over the last few years. Not really. That's just what Pat says every time that he brings up a documentary. But no, anyways, Making Fun is the story of Funko. So obviously the people that make the Funko Pops that are crazy popular right now. And I thought that it would be fitting to discuss on the podcast because obviously Funko has become this huge thing that is very ingrained with nerd culture. This documentary dives into the origin of the company. I guess they started out making Bob's Big Boys bobbleheads. I've never eaten at one of those restaurants, but
oh really?
That's what. Yeah. Never once.
They're pretty good.
Are they?
Oh, there's one in Corydon, that's where I went to high school, and a couple of my friends actually worked there. So
I was literally just getting ready to say we don't have those in Indiana, and then you just schooled me by saying that we do, but we didn't have them in Evansville, so I'll say that from where I'm from. But I've seen them throughout Ohio, so I'm sure at some point I'll try it. But anyways, that's how the company kind of got started. Was they somehow got the rights to make and sell the Bob's Big Boy bobblehead, and then they slowly got the rights to other characters like Betty Boop at like licensing shows and things like that, and then they eventually got to the point where they started making Austin Powers bobbleheads, and that's when the company really started to take off, and people started to collect anything that the company was putting out, which I didn't realize. I only knew them from the pop figures, so I didn't know that they had like this long backstory, and they have been around since like the early 90s, but they only did bobblehead related products for a while, and then when they initially started doing the pops, their fan base was hesitant to actually start collecting and buying it because they wanted bobbleheads and they didn't like it, which is so crazy to me because the pop figures are obviously like their bread and butter now, and it's the thing that everybody collects. So obviously, you know, those things did take off and the rest is history. So the thing about this documentary is I was expecting to just legitimately hear about this company and where the company came from and to see the story of how it came to prominence. But the majority of the documentary actually focuses on Funko fans and what drives their nerddom, which I really, really appreciated. You know, we see a couple fans get married. We see a fan that was like sick with cancer get to go meet and hang out with Nichelle Nichols. I don't know where Noelle came from. Nichelle Nichols. She played Uhura in the original Star Trek TV show. We see this one guy who used nerddom to cope with growing up in a rough area of the Bronx, and just little cool stories like that throughout the documentary that were all just intertwined by Funko-related products, which I thought was really cool and really kind of added to the depth of the documentary. They also talked to a lot of like prominent figures in nerd culture. They talked to a couple of the Power Rangers. They talked to Lou Ferrigno. They talked to Robert Englund, who played Freddy Krueger. And then, of course, Kevin Smith, who, you know, you and I are both huge fans of. And then other celebrities just around meeting fans at cons and having them bring up pops to sign, and the culture of collecting and the culture of Comic-Cons, which I thought was pretty cool. So obviously this documentary is a lot deeper than I thought it was going to be when I decided to watch it. It really evaluates nerd culture and does a study of what drives collectors in a certain way. All of these things obviously hit home for me because not only am I a nerd, but I am a collector. We were just talking about it. So sometimes I look around my nerd cave or my office and I think, like, what the fuck is all of this stuff that I've accumulated over the years? But to hear people kind of put it in the perspective of it's the stuff that makes them happy and the stuff that reminds them of their childhood, it all makes a lot of sense. Like, nostalgia is a very powerful thing, and obviously Hollywood has discovered that recently with the return of a lot of TV shows like Roseanne, or, you know, sequels to older movies that are being made and coming out. But I definitely think that nostalgia is what drives a lot of fandom. A lot of things that I love and a lot of things that I collect, watch, or read have some type of connection to earlier memories of things that I enjoyed when I was younger. And if I learned anything from this documentary, it's that Funko has no problem capitalizing on that and making a profit. So I'm somewhat joking there, but I don't know. I really appreciated, I guess, that this documentary dived more into nerddom than a company that makes little plastic toys. So it was a lot deeper and a lot cooler than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, that's a cool angle. I assumed when I had heard about this documentary, I'll be real honest with you, you called dibs on it, and I was like, I don't even know what that is. And then I looked it up, and I was like, oh, okay, that sounds kind of interesting. But I kind of had the same reaction that you did. Was I was like, I'm vaguely interested in the history of this company, but I'm not a hardcore collector of these by any means. I have several pop figures. I think I only have one thing from Funko that isn't a pop figure, which I have a reaction figure of Jaws. So yeah, I'm not a huge toy collector myself, so most of the stuff that I have is just from the Marvel collector core box that you mentioned, and I do get them to have celebrity sign at cons. That's kind of my thing now, and that's probably from now on going to be the pops that I buy unless something comes out that I really absolutely love. It's probably going to just be the pops to have people sign at PopCon or Comic-Con or whatever. So yeah, I'm not a huge collector by any means. It was actually kind of funny that you brought this up because I was at work yesterday and I was wearing, because I dress pretty casually on Saturdays when I have to work because there's fucking nobody there. And I just happened, it was laundry day or whatever, so I was kind of just rooting through my closet trying to find like the last t-shirt that I have that's still clean before I went to work, and it was just the Hulk Funko Pop t-shirt that I got from, I don't even remember, was it the Hulk box? I can't remember what box it was. I mean, it would make sense if it was
the
Hulk.
one with Bruce Banner and the Hulk on it?
Yeah, the gray Hulk, yeah.
Yeah, that's that was the Incredible Hulk box.
Yeah. That would make sense. And so I was wearing that t-shirt, and somebody came up to me and he was like, oh, are you a big collector? And I was like, not really. I mean, I do get them occasionally. And apparently he was telling me about his son-in-law and how he's like this insane collector and has like thousands of these things. And he's one of those guys that it probably started off just from talking to this guy, it sounds like it started off as him kind of doing what we do, which is just kind of get the ones that we want. And then it just became this huge thing. And like, he gets all of them. He was telling me, this guy was telling me that he would like send him text messages if he was going out of town and to like look at 7-Elevens if he's near a 7-Eleven to go, because I guess they have some exclusives as well, which I didn't even know that 7-Eleven had exclusives for pops. That's kind of silly. But yeah, he was just telling me all this stuff. Like, they're going to his son-in-law and his daughter, and they're, I guess they have a couple of kids. They're all taking a trip to Disney just from him selling some of these pops and just like
holy
crazy shit. Yeah. So he was telling me that he was like, I thought it was silly, but then he was showing me about all of this money that he's made. Like, basically he's like, I almost sat on one of them and he freaked out because it's like $150 pop that I almost sat on. So yeah, it's kind of funny how just like these little silly, not bobblehead, but some of them are bobblehead things have kind of grown into this huge culture. I am a member of not one, but two pop groups in Evansville. So there's that, even though I kind of feel like a phony when it comes to those groups because I don't give a shit about, I just kind of like looking at some of the stuff that they buy, but I'm not really interested in it.
Well, that's the one thing about the documentary that they think they should have shown the dark side of Funko Pops, because there's people like us who like, oh, this is cool, like this is the Hulk or this is Batman, like this is something that reminds me of things I like. But then there are the people like that who are insane people that want to collect them all and are aggressive and that kind of stuff. And I want to see a documentary about the dark side, the underworld of pop collecting. So.
Yeah, that would be that. I think that would be too dark. Like, I don't know if you could show that. Like, that would be too far.
I remember it was probably like a year or two ago, and when I was still living in Evansville, there was a news story at one point about this person who, like, somebody had broken into their house and stole their pop collection.
Yep.
And their pop collection was like worth over however much money, and it was like this big thing, and I just, like, that's insane to me. So, I mean, it makes sense, but it's crazy.
Yeah, before we move on, I did want to share one more story. So I was at the comic book shop. I mean, this was probably 6 months to a year ago, and they occasionally have like this little side table where if like the boxes get crushed or something like that, they usually give them to you for super cheap. And I will always look at those because, again, if I really like something and I have the X-Files, like I have Mulder and Scully from the X-Files, and they're out of the box. Like if I know that I'm not going to eventually sell this, then I just take it out of the box. So there was a Master from The Strain, which is a show that I've talked about a few times on the podcast that I really like. And it's just a cool looking pop, and the box was like completely demolished. And so I was like, well, shit, for a few bucks, I'm going to buy this cool looking pop from a show that I like. So I took it up to the counter. He's like, man, you're buying this? Like, he was so shocked that I was going to buy it because the box was all destroyed. I was like, yeah, I'm going to take it out of the box anyways. He's like, you take it out of the box? I was like, you need to fucking cool it, dude. I was like, it's not that big of a deal. I was like, I just really like the show, and I think it's a cool looking pop. So I'm going to put it in my nerd room and display it because that's what normal people do. And he went on this big tangent about how like he does the Marvel Collecticore and the Smuggler's Bounty and all that stuff. And he doesn't even take them out of the box that it comes in.
What the fuck is the point?
Exactly. I was like, you're a real cool guy, and I'm going to fucking walk away now. Like, I don't like gatekeeping and being like, you're a fucking weirdo. Like, everybody has their thing, and everybody can be nerds about different things. But I was just like, you're a fucking psychopath. Like, that's a crazy person thing to do.
Yeah, that is super weird. And I'm pretty confident I know which comic book shop you're talking about.
Yeah.
Obviously, I won't put their name on blast, but there are a lot of fucking weirdos that work there. So
yeah. And just to give you a better picture of this guy, he does, in fact, have a ponytail. So,
you know what's crazy is I imagined that it was the guy with the ponytail before you said it was the guy with the
Yep, you nailed it.
So
he's actually a really nice guy. But just about that particular conversation, I was like, I'm getting the fuck away from you.
All right. So now that we put probably the only guy that works in a comic book store in Evansville with a ponytail on blast.
Unfortunately, he's not the only one that works there with a ponytail.
Okay, good point. Anyways, man, what are you into?
So, like I said, this episode is sponsored by Letterboxd. No, of course, I'm kidding. I'm going to talk about my recent rewatch of the MCU films. So the reason I bring up Letterboxd again is because I tweeted this out a few days ago. I finally finished my rewatch. It took a couple of weeks. After we reviewed Avengers Infinity War, part of that episode, we did a top 5 MCU films. And I realized that after that conversation, and of course you mentioned your list of your favorite MCU films on Letterboxd, and I realized that, first I had to steal that idea, because all my good ideas are just your ideas. And I also realized that a lot of these Phase 1 films, especially, I hadn't seen in a really long time. I think it was before Age of Ultron was the last time that I sat down and rewatched all the films leading up to one of these big films. And so I was like, I got to rectify that situation. And so I finally, the last couple of weeks, started rewatching them, and I went and saw Infinity War, I think it was last weekend, for the third time, and that kind of capped off my rewatch. And of course, I'm not going to go through all of the films and how I feel about all of them, because it would take forever, and a lot of these films we reviewed on the podcast anyways. I mean, literally since Thor: The Dark World, which was our first episode. Please don't go back and see it. Like, I literally, or not see it, or listen to it. I literally looked at my Letterboxd or something. Oh, no, I looked on our website, because you can go in and look on the star ratings for every movie that we've ever reviewed, like formally reviewed as a main topic. You can go on our website, thenerdspodcast.com, click on the Nerd Reviews tab. I gave Thor: The Dark World 3 stars. So that episode of the podcast has to be absolute garbage, because we did not want to rock the boat at all, apparently, because that movie is a fucking straight up garbage movie. It is really bad.
I haven't seen it since the theater. I don't know. I feel like it came out. I don't know what I gave it. I probably gave it 3 or 3.5. But I would imagine, now that we know what we know about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I don't know. I'm not going to make excuses. It's a bad movie.
Oh yeah, it's really bad. And I have another funny story. So I was talking to one of my coworkers at work, and he's actually a guy that I talk about nerdy stuff because he's one of the more geekier guys that I work with. And I was telling him about my rewatch and that we had just literally watched the night before. We had watched Thor: Dark World, and I hadn't seen it since the theater. And I was like, man, that movie's so bad. And he's like, actually, that's one of my favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. And I was just like, I came on pretty aggressively, as you might imagine, but I was like, why? You need to explain yourself right now. And it was almost like deer in the headlights. I could see it in his face. I was like, and I had to like legitimately like pump the brakes. I was like, no, I'm not being an asshole. Like, I know that's usually my default setting, but I'm trying not to be an asshole. Like, I'm genuinely curious why you like that movie. Like, make me understand. Like, I literally want to understand why you like this movie. And he just kind of explained that he's a big fan of North mythology, and just like he likes the mythology in the Thor universe, and he kind of liked that they were bringing more of that into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I was like, okay, well, I don't agree with you at all, but I respect your opinion, but I don't agree with it. I just think that movie takes itself way too fucking seriously. I mean,
if he went on Maury, they would determine that was a lie, because nobody is into Norse mythology. I'm going to throw that out there.
But yeah, that movie just takes itself way too fucking seriously. Like, the best part of Thor, and we saw that in Thor Ragnarok, is like the original Thor is when he's on Earth hanging out with Natalie Portman and kind of a more, I wouldn't say loose character, but like more of a kind of a, he does have some humor in that movie, in the first one, especially when he's on Earth. And they essentially made a 2-hour version of that with Thor Ragnarok. Obviously, he's a more involved character at that point, as you would expect after everything that's happened in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But Thor: Dark World just takes a complete step backwards in that area, and there's almost none of that at all in I almost said Thor Ragnarok, in Thor: Dark World, and that movie's just garbage. But I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit. I will say that Iron Man, the original one, obviously it kickstarted the Marvel Cinematic Universe, still really holds up. I was surprised I knew I was going to like the movie, but I didn't expect to really like it as much as I did, because it's been so long since I've watched that movie, and the movies have gotten so much better since then. I was like, oh, I don't think that this is going to really hold up. I loved it just as much as I used to love it. So I was really surprised at how well that movie holds up after all these years. Incredible Hulk, not so much. So I mentioned this, I think, either last episode or maybe it was a couple episodes ago, where I think The Happening either came out like the weekend before or maybe the same weekend as The Incredible Hulk did in theaters. And my girlfriend at the time and I decided to go see The Happening first, and then we saw The Incredible Hulk. And I was so happy to wash my palate of that awful movie that is The Happening, because The Incredible Hulk was better than that movie, but that is literally the worst movie I've ever seen in my life. So you can't get a whole lot worse than that. So I was just so happy to see a good movie again. And I was happy to see a decent Hulk movie again, because the first Hulk movie was so bad. Now it does not hold up. Like, now watching it, given what we know with the Marvel Cinematic Universe today, it really, really doesn't hold up. Like, it's a decent movie. It's not horrible. I just don't know if that character can hold its own movie. Because I was watching that movie and I was just like, the action's kind of cool, but the character development is not the best. And I mean, I think Edward Norton obviously is a talented actor, and I get why he didn't want to do more Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. But the fact that there's a different Hulk now, it just feels like it's not part of the MCU. Because I know that, I mean, obviously that's easy to say because Edward Norton's not part of the MCU, and technically that movie does happen in the MCU, but it still doesn't feel like it because of the character change or the actor change, but also because they didn't really know what they were doing at the time, because The Incredible Hulk, I think, came out like the very next year. Like, they hadn't really formed what they wanted to do with the MCU, and it doesn't really connect all that well. So, or
it came
really
out like
at all.
A couple months later.
Oh,
came
really?
out like 2 months later.
It did
after
see.
Iron
It
Man.
did seem like it was a really quick turnaround, if I remember correctly. So a couple of months does sound about right. So they didn't have any idea about the MCU at all. It really wasn't until Iron Man 2, which I'm going to get to here in a second, that they really kind of started to find their groove a little bit and start to bring the whole MCU together. So I really just was disappointed in the Incredible Hulk. Just rewatching it, knowing what what I know about the MCU now. I'll go ahead and skip the thing I had about Thor: Dark World because obviously I just talked about it. But Iron Man 2, I was surprised at how much I liked that movie because I remember disliking it quite a lot when I first saw it. I'm not sure in retrospect that it necessarily deserves to be shit on as much as it did when it first, or it had when it first came out. People really disliked that movie when it first came out, and judging by the high standards that the first one set, I get that, but I still don't think that it's a bad movie. The Sam Rockwell is a little over the top, which kind of hurts my heart a little bit to say that about my boy Sam Rockwell, but he is a little over the top in this movie. And of course, Mickey Rourke is not the best in this movie either. But I really liked the fact that, like I said, the Marvel Cinematic Universe kind of starts taking shape in this movie. So I really appreciate that. One movie that I kind of like The Incredible Hulk that I don't like is Age of Ultron. I just keep on going back and forth as far as my list is concerned about switching Iron Man 2 and Age of Ultron because I don't like that movie. The third act, I get sets the stage for kind of what's been happening recently with the Avengers, but I don't know. The Black Widow and Hulk stuff is really stupid. The farm really slows that movie down to a halt. And I feel like they wasted a really cool villain on this movie. And I don't even know if they necessarily did the villain justice too, because I get that Tony Stark is part of his personality. And obviously Tony Stark is sarcastic and cracks a lot of jokes. But the fact that a robot would crack all those jokes, it doesn't feel right to me. I also have a bias because I hate the Robert California character in The Office. Like, I absolutely cannot stand him. I hate that whole arc in The Office, and that's all I hear when I hear Ultron is Robert California. So yeah, it's very disappointing because I obviously want to like an Avengers movie, but the Phase 3 is so great. I looked at my top 10 this morning when I was thinking, kind of looking back on my rewatch. 6 of them are from Phase 3. I mean, it's so fantastic. And of course, the Rue Bros are great. I was rewatching Winter Soldier, which of course is their first Marvel Cinematic Universe movie. And I was like, man, this is so fucking fantastic. I always talk about The Dark Knight as being this great crime movie that just so happens to have Batman in it. And I kind of feel similar to that with Winter Soldier. Like, Winter Soldier is just this awesome spy movie that happens to have Captain America in it. And I was like, how is this movie not going to make my top 5? And then I just keep going with Phase 3, and it just kept slowly getting bumped further and further down. And that just shows you how good Phase 3 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is. That a movie like Winter Soldier, that it's fantastic, that really holds up, just kept getting knocked down further and further down my list.
Yeah. I mean, Phase 3 is, I mean, that's the thing, is Marvel just keeps getting better. Like, it gets me excited for what's to come after Infinity War Part 2 or whatever it's going to end up being called next year, just to kind of see, especially since there's like this slew of new characters that they have to play with. It's I don't know, it's a great time to be a nerd, and obviously the last 10 years of Marvel has been amazing. So both financially and critically, and it's obviously stuff we like, so it's good stuff, man.
For sure. I'm curious, have you watched or have you rewatched Black Panther since it came out a couple of weeks ago?
No, I almost watched it last night, actually, but I have not rewatched it.
Yeah, that slowed us down. My wife actually kind of jumped on board with my rewatch about, I think, like Phase 2. And so we kind of got slowed down a little bit with Black Panther because we got to the point, we were doing it so quickly that we got to the point where Black Panther hadn't come out on Blu-ray yet. And we were just we had to wait like 3 or 4 days for it to come out on Blu-ray. I mean, of course, we could have found it illegally somewhere else, but I decided since it was so close, we might as well just go ahead and wait. And so we rewatched it. It's still a fantastic movie. It doesn't hit as hard as the first time. That's why I was kind of curious to hear your thoughts on it. It's still a fantastic movie. I mean, it's still in my top 10, but I think it's only like 6 or 7.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that it will be in my top 10 of 2018. I'm curious as to where it falls, though. I will need to rewatch it pretty soon just to see how it holds up.
Yeah, my top 10 for 2018 is already filling up very quickly. I think I already have 6 or 7 movies so far. I mean, I liked Deadpool 2 a lot more than you did, though, so that's already in my top 10. Obviously, we still have half of a year to go.
I'm glad you brought up Deadpool 2. So I ended up going and seeing it again after we reviewed it last week with Brittany, my wife, because she hadn't seen it and she really wanted to. And I liked it a lot more the second time. I picked up on some jokes that I didn't pick up on the first time. I had really bad seats the first time I saw it. Like, it was second or third row, so I was like looking straight up at it, and I think that kind of took me out of it a little bit. So I don't know if it'd be in my top 10 at the end of the year, but I probably would change my rating to like a 4 out of 5 for what it's worth.
So what you're saying is I was right and you were wrong.
Yeah, sure.
Per usual. All right, man. So our next segment is just plainly called comics. We read a ton of comics, like to spotlight 1 or 2 an episodes. So what'd you read this week?
I think this is like the longest we've ever gone before getting into comics. We both had some long stuff to talk about for what we were into. So I'll try to be somewhat brief, but I did read Black Panther #1, which came out this past Wednesday. It was written by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and Daniel Acuna was the artist. So this is not what I was expecting from a new Black Panther comic. I think that we had talked about it maybe off air, but it seems like there had been a lot of Black Panther #1s over the last year or two. So I figured this was another in a line of comics trying to capitalize on the movie's success. And while I'm not saying that wasn't the idea behind it, it's definitely different than what I was expecting story-wise. So the book starts out with a little exposition about how millennia ago, some people from Wakanda split off and went to space and then spread out to like 5 different galaxies and became powerful beings in space. And from there, we are thrown into a story where T'Challa awakes on a spacecraft and is being transported to a place that is mining vibranium on a far-off planet for like the ancestors of Wakanda. So T'Challa tries to escape, as you imagine he would, but he stops, and then we see him interact with other slaves and the guards on this planet. But through it all, I started to notice that in this comic, T'Challa has not said a word the entire time, which I thought was weird because I was about done with the comic when you get to that point. So towards the end of the issue, there's another tribe from these like space Wakandans that ends up attacking the mine, and T'Challa ends up being rescued by them. And this tribe in particular looks more humanoid and is wearing something similar to what the Black Panther garments on Earth looks like. And then a big reveal comes whenever T'Challa finally speaks with one of these people. And as I read this comic, I was sure that I had missed something. I thought maybe one of the other Black Panther books that are out right now had ended with like T'Challa being kidnapped and this was an offshoot of another series. But as it turns out, it's not. And the reader is supposed to have a lot of questions as to what's going on. That they basically sum it up. You know those pages after the story's done where the author can like write a little bit or whatever. That
epilogue?
Basically said, yeah, the epilogue or the solicitation page or whatever you want to call it. But the issue basically says in that exact wording, like, you know, nobody knows what's going on. This is crazy. So I thought that was an interesting take on a #1 issue. We talk all the time about how we don't want much exposition as a story is starting out, but considering this issue pretty much gave the reader nothing to go off of, I was definitely confused most of the time. However, I do appreciate how fast moving the comic was and that the art told most of the story. I think Daniel Acuna did some great work here, and I'm actually really excited to see what twists this book takes. I don't know how it's very believable that in the given Black Panther's mythology that we know that there are hidden Wakanda empires through space, but I think it's a cool concept, and I'm kind of on the fence on if I'm going to keep reading it or not. I guess it depends on how my stack of comics dwindles over the next couple weeks, but it was definitely a different take on the character, and I have to appreciate that.
So you mentioned that it seems like there has been a lot of Black Panther #1s, and Coates, I'm not going to try to butcher his first name, actually has been writing the character for a little bit. The last time they kind of rebooted the character, or kind of started putting out new books for Black Panther was, I think, like 2 years ago. And I really liked the first few issues. I'm glad to hear that this one is pretty fast paced, it sounds like, because my problem with his writing is the fact that it's very slow. I mean, you have to really enjoy like character development and different character choices and stuff like that. And I really enjoyed kind of like, he had a really good balance of, he's a warrior because he's Black Panther, but he's also a king, so he has to make a lot of tough choices. And that's really kind of what that particular run of the comic kind of focused on. But you can just tell how slow moving it is by the fact that most story arcs are like 4 or 5, maybe 6 issues. The first story arc of this particular comic was like 12 or 13 issues. So it really took a long time to finally get where it was supposed to be going. So that's just why I didn't stick with it, is because I appreciated his quality of writing. I just didn't really like his style and how kind of slow it was. So I am excited, even though I won't end up picking up this book, that this one sounds like it's much more fast-paced.
Yeah, I mean, it helps that T'Challa has like 2 sentences in the entire book. Like, there's not a lot of exposition through dialogue, but if this is the same guy that wrote that #1 you were talking about that I read a couple years ago, like that was tough to get through. So
yeah, it was. It is the same guy.
It's definitely good that he's kind of learned to adapt to writing comics. So that's cool.
For sure.
What did you read?
I read, and it wasn't even something that I knew was coming out until a few days ago. And once I heard about it, and once I kind of started reading a little bit more, kind of the backstory to this comic, I was super excited for it. It's TMNT Urban Legends, which it was written by a guy named Gary Carlson, and the art was done by a guy named Frank Fosco. And essentially what this is, which again, I didn't really know a whole lot about it going in, was there was a kind of a non-canon Image comic TMNT book that they kind of call TMNT Volume 3 that was put out years ago. And it never got finished because it was kind of had a cult following, but it didn't really sell as well as they wanted it to. And it was super, super dark, very, very edgy. And it just never got an ending to it. And so recently, and fans have been clamoring for them to finally finish the book for years now. And IDW, who does the TMNT books now, must have just gotten the rights or whatever. And so they are essentially reproducing the original TMNT Volume 3 and calling it Urban Legends. But they're also finishing it, so it won't be a complete reproduction. Obviously, they're going to give it a few more issues after the fact to finally finish the story. And for people like me, and most of our listeners, I would imagine, never read Volume 3. So I was super excited about it, and it is fucking dark, man. Like, even this first issue, like, it starts off literally the first page, so I don't imagine you could consider this a spoiler, because I mean, it's literally, if it's not the first page, it's the second page. Donatello gets shot, literally gets shot, and is essentially on his deathbed almost this entire issue. Another turtle gets, I won't say what happens to him, obviously, but he gets hurt very, very badly as well. So it's intense, man. It's super dark. It's more like the original comic, like they all have the red bandanas and stuff like that. So it's kind of harping back to the original comic, and it's super, super dark. So if you're a fan of strictly the 80s cartoon, or maybe the most recent cartoon, if you're a fan of the Fox TMNT cartoon, you can stop fucking listening to this podcast right now. I love everybody that listens to it, except for the people that are a fan of the Fox TMNT show, because that show is garbage. But anyways, yeah, I don't know if you'll necessarily like this. Like if you've never been introduced to the TMNT comic book, even the most recent run isn't quite as dark as the original run, but it still definitely has its moments. This is just like they jumped off the fucking deep end with this book. And I mean, I love it. This is, I think, what you need to do when you have a story that you know isn't going to be canon. You can have fun with it. You can just go crazy. I still think that obviously you need to be a little bit grounded because you still need to tell an interesting story. But I think this is kind of the perfect blend of that. Like it's batshit crazy, but it's grounded just enough that I'm excited to kind of see where it goes.
Yeah, I almost picked this up, and this probably would have been what I tried to talk about had I not read Black Panther instead. I removed this from my cart on Midtown, so I might go back and put it back in because it sounds pretty cool. And I'm so behind on the current TMNT run that I'll never get caught up, so I'll probably stop buying that. But I'd still like to read a TMNT book, so this sounds like it might be one to look into because it sounds pretty cool. That reminds me though that Kevin Eastman is also in that Funko documentary, so if you needed another reason to maybe give it a shot, there is a portion in there with him, and he's obviously a pretty cool guy that co-created the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that we got to meet at our first Indie PopCon. So.
All right, man. So our next segment is just plainly called Nerd News. Tyler compiles all the big nerd headlines each week, and he presents them so we could talk about them. So what's Nerd News this week?
So a few stories here. The first being that Jake Gyllenhaal is being eyed for the villainous role in the next Spider-Man Homecoming movie, and that role is Mysterio.
So the big news for me is the fact who the villain is, not necessarily that Jake Gyllenhaal is going to be. I think
Correct.
That's such a cool villain to do, and if they can pull it off like they pulled off Homecoming with Michael Keaton essentially using one of my least favorite Spider-Man villains, and you can make that villain cool, you're gonna do just fucking awesome with a villain that I really like. So I'm super excited about it. I don't particularly care about the Jake Gyllenhaal thing. Like, that's cool. I'm excited for him to do another big blockbuster because obviously Prince of Persia didn't really work out for him. So I'm excited that he's willing to kind of dip his toes back into that water. But yeah, I'm more excited about who the villain is, not necessarily who's playing the villain.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of my point of bringing up the story too, was Mysterio is like one of those classic Spider-Man villains that we still haven't seen on the big screen, and I think that Jake Gyllenhaal is an interesting pick for it. Like, I would like to see him kind of go a little ham with it because Mysterio can kind of be a cheesy villain, but I think that given what we know about the character and even given like all of the technology we've seen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there's some really cool stuff you could do there with him. I mean, Marvel's getting better with each movie at doing really great villains, so I would definitely love to see a cool Mysterio story told because he is a fun Spider-Man villain. Like, I don't think I had him in my top 5 back when we did top 5 Spider-Man villains in one of our earlier episodes, but if I rethought that list, he could definitely be on there.
Yeah, for sure. But what I'm confused about, given what happens at the end of Infinity War, is how they're going to be another Spider-Man movie. I'm just being stupid. I'm being a dick.
I mean, that's the whole thing, right? Like,
yeah.
That's the only bad thing about the ending of Infinity War is we know it's not going to stick. But yeah, it's cool stuff. So this next one I brought up pretty much just because you posted it on Facebook, but there was a new trailer this week featuring your boy, Andy Serkis, his new movie, which is a Jungle Book movie called Mowgli. What did you think of the trailer, bud?
Can I be objective? I don't think so. Like, honestly, I mean, is it Jungle Book? No. Do I think that I'm going to be completely blown away by it like I was with Jungle Book? No. But I think it's going to be a fun movie.
No, it's not.
See, that's the thing. I can't be objective because who's making it. I don't think that you can be objective because it's not a Disney movie.
No, I think that the trailer is fucking dumb whenever it starts off saying the darkest version ever told.
Well, that
of
was
this
fucking
story.
dumb. I did.
That was
My
very fucking
butthole
dumb.
clenched a little bit because that's really cringeworthy.
No. I mean, I love Christian Bale. I think Christian Bale is a fantastic actor, and I love that he's Bagheera in this movie. So I want it to be good too, but nothing in this movie looks any different than the Jungle Book movie we got. When was it? Last year or the year before? So I just don't understand why they even continued with this movie. I think that there's other things that Andy Serkis could have done for his directorial debut that utilized mocap that wasn't something that we've already seen like 3 or 4 versions of.
Yeah, I mean the trailer didn't do the movie any favors. Like it's not a very good trailer. But I mean, I'm going to go see this movie for sure. It didn't it didn't do anything to make me not want to see the movie.
I'm sure we'll review it. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm going to have to buy a ticket at some point to it, but I just.
And I almost guarantee you that I will give it 4 stars. Like right now, the movie's not even out. I'll probably give it 4 stars.
That's fair. I'm curious what the casual movie-going audience thinks about it. Like, are they able to differentiate that this isn't another Disney version or this isn't a sequel to that movie or anything like that? I just don't.
No, they won't be able to because they're fucking stupid.
That is
people
correct.
are stupid. Yeah, for sure.
Let's see. I'm gonna cut a story just because we're running long. So I'll end with this one because it's a good segue into our main topic. So James Mangold, the guy who gave us Logan, has been tapped to write and direct a Boba Fett standalone movie.
So you would assume that I would be super excited for this movie, but I think the appeal and charm of that character is the mystery surrounding him. He just looks cool and we don't know that much about him, so everybody's kind of attached themselves to that character. I just don't think it works as well when you know a lot about the character.
I think Boba Fett is the most overrated character in all of Star Wars. Like, I don't dislike the character by any means, but I don't get the appeal that's always been there. Like the fact that, he's got
a jetpack and he looks cool. That's the appeal. But once you peel back the layers and actually give us more information, it sounds like we're arguing and we're not. Like the tone of my voice makes it sound like I'm arguing with you, but I'm actually somewhat agreeing with you. But I think that people have attached themselves because of the jetpack and the fact that he looks cool and he's super mysterious. But once you get more into it, I think that is going to, all of the appeal that we have for that character right now is going to go away. Well, I don't think the jetpack's going to go away, but you can only see somebody ride around on a jetpack for so long and it'd be cool.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if he's able to do something cool with the character. But as far as I'm concerned, especially since all of the extended universe stuff isn't canon anymore, like Homeboy is still digesting in the Sarlacc pit. So not that cool of a villain. He accidentally got killed by Han Solo when his jetpack got fucked up. So, yeah. And say what you will about them killing the character that way, but I've never gotten the appeal. So, he's a fine character, but I don't know. Obviously we'll get into what we thought about Solo. It doesn't look like that movie's making a lot of money this weekend, like what they expected. I think it's going to come out. I was just looking at an article. I think it's going to come out about 101 million, and they were expecting about 130 to 140. So I don't know if any of their plans going forward with these spin-off Star Wars movies are going to change, but I don't know that a Boba Fett movie sells any more tickets than a Han Solo movie. So we'll see.
No, we were talking about this off recording, and I just want to say, poor Disney, while you were saying those figures. How are they going to survive? But I think they kind of blew their load with these standalone movies. I guess technically Rogue One is the first one, but like we were just talking about before we started recording, Rogue One feels more like a Star Wars movie. Solo, and we're going to get into it here in a little bit, feels kind of like the first standalone movie. And they picked essentially their most popular character. They haven't really, obviously he's featured a lot in the original trilogy in Force Awakens, but he hasn't really gotten his first movie. This is his first movie that he's the star of. He's one of the more popular characters, if not one of the most popular characters in the Star Wars universe, and he still can't sell that many tickets. Like, he's making Doctor Strange money right now, but he's not making Star Wars money. That's the problem.
Yeah, and I mean we can get into it with the review, but I don't know. I'm the guy who wants to see a Star Wars movie every year. Like,
oh yeah, for sure.
Keep giving it to me, so I hope this doesn't deter them from continuing with the plan. But I think that they do need to take a step back and reevaluate. So,
for sure. And let's just jump right into our main topic, which is obviously Solo, a Star Wars story review. Of course, this is a prequel to the original trilogy. I believe, did they say that it was 10 years before? Or is that something that I read? I don't remember, but it's essentially 10 years before A New Hope. Of course, this movie was directed by Ron Howard. If you hadn't heard already, he took over for Phil Lord and Chris Miller after they were fired. They're still listed as executive producers, but I highly doubt that they had much input after they got fucking fired. So they're still technically listed as executive producers. Of course, this stars Alden Ehrenreich as young Han Solo, who, desperate to get back to his lady love, which is played by Emilia Clarke, joins a band of smugglers to pull an impossible job. So this is the part of our review, kind of just the intro where we talk about our expectations or if we were nervous or excited, whatever. And of course, we say this when we review any Star Wars movie or even the MCU movies. Of course, we were excited. But given the turmoil surrounding this film, I mentioned, of course, the original directors getting fired. I didn't mention that the star of this film, also there was some rumors that they had to hire an acting coach for him. And so there was a lot of controversy surrounding this film. I mean, you're never going to change directors midway through a film and still really make a great film. Like, I just don't think that they can do that. I don't think there was anybody that could pull that off. So the closer we got, like, the more I was very anxious that they were going to pull off a good movie. Like, I just didn't feel like this character needed a prequel because of his arc in the original trilogy. And then, of course, that's concluded in Force Awakens. I think it's just so perfect that I just didn't feel like they needed to revisit the character. And that was just kind of a long-winded way for me to say that I don't think that I've been at this least excited for a Star Wars film since maybe Attack of the Clones.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm right there with you. Like, typically when a Star Wars movie comes out, like, I have butterflies in my stomach, and it's something that I count down the days to and am very excited about. And for this movie, I didn't even go see it Thursday night.
Me either.
So, Last Jedi, I had my tickets 2 or 3 months in advance as soon as I went on sale and knew exactly where I was going to see it. And it was Thursday night, so nothing would be spoiled. Where this movie, obviously, I wasn't rushing out to do that. So I would say I'm definitely in the same boat as you were. It was on my radar, but it wasn't something that I was like losing sleep over or anything, like, from an excited standpoint. So it's definitely a risk for them. Like, it's the first time they've recast a character like that. Well, I guess not Obi-Wan in the prequels and a couple people in the prequels, but
yeah, but that was more seamless because it seemed.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. So and that's the thing, right? Is this isn't that far removed from where Han is in A New Hope, and it's a different actor. So like it was definitely a test for what their movies are going to look like going forward, and I don't know. We'll get into it in the review, but I just definitely wasn't excited for it. So
yeah, and I before we get started, I want to kind of double down on that point. Is one of my comedian friends on Facebook, he had posted something about how, like, he's not that excited to go see this movie, and he mentioned that he thinks it's because of their Star Wars fatigue, because we're getting Star Wars movies every year, and I kind of commented and disagreed with him a little bit. I think it's just more about, I didn't think that they needed this film. Like, I don't think there's a Star Wars fatigue. I just wasn't super excited about this particular film for the reasons I just talked about. I'll still be excited for the next Star Wars film next year. Like, it just so happened to be the events surrounding this movie just didn't get me all that excited. I went and saw this movie last night at 10 o'clock. And if we weren't recording this when we were recording it Sunday, I probably just would have waited until Sunday to see it. That's more of a product of my crazy work schedule recently. I just hadn't had an opportunity to go see it yet. But the fact that I didn't make it a priority kind of tells you a little bit about how I was feeling going into this movie.
Yeah, I also agree with you. I do not think it is Star Wars fatigue at all. I think it's just the decision around this movie coming out and like the promotional material we saw and just a lot of other circumstances. Obviously, there's not Marvel Cinematic Universe fatigue. So yeah. I would argue there's not Star Wars fatigue either. Like Star Wars is always going to be popular and always going to be bankable. So I disagree with your comedian friend.
It's Gavin. You knew it was Gavin, right?
Yeah, I just don't want to say his on the podcast.
He wouldn't care. But anyways, yeah, we break down these reviews into different segments like we do with the podcast. And this first segment is just kind of our general feeling about the movie after we've seen it. And we call it Broad Strokes. So broad strokes wise, what do you feel about Solo, a Star Wars story?
So, I mean, we just talked for a while about how we weren't excited for it. And with that being said, you know, if you're not excited for something, that means that you don't really have expectations for it either, right? So with that being said, I wouldn't say I was disappointed with this movie because, again, not really any expectations going into it. I would just say, to me, it didn't add enough to Han's backstory of value to make me care. And I'll get into that more with the story, but there were certain beats I wanted this movie to hit, and it hit a couple of them, but it didn't hit all of them. And at the end of the day, with what we know about the character, it didn't do anything that makes me look at Han in a different light. It didn't seem like a valuable story to tell.
Yeah, so we had a 1 week break from disagreeing on a movie, and we're right back into our regular formula of agreeing completely 100% on these movies. I really wanted this movie to prove me wrong. Like I said in the intro, I just didn't think that this was a story that needed to be told, and I really wanted them to come out of the gate strong and prove me wrong, that this movie was more than just a cash grab, more than just this is our most popular character, so we're going to give him a prequel and give him one of these solo standalone movies is going to be his. And it just never did that. It has its moments, but it never got me there. It never felt more than just an excuse to make a solo movie. And it felt like the best idea they had was, we want to make a Han Solo movie. Not that they had a good movie that happens to be a Han Solo movie. They just really wanted to make this fucking movie, and they just made it work. When a robot is the most enjoyable, compelling character in a movie, that's a problem. So I felt like they just thought that, we got a good idea for a movie because it's just a Han Solo movie and we're just going to make it work. And that's exactly what I was afraid it was going to be going into it. And it did not do anything to prove me wrong, unfortunately.
So I know you said that, it sounds like we're agreeing. I will say it sounds like, we're going to get into it, but I do think I like this movie more than you did. I just was more disappointed with the story they told. So we'll see. We'll see where we come out with our ratings at the end.
Yeah, I will say that, and this is a little bit more of a product, again, of my crazy work schedule, but I had, at times, a hard time keeping my eyes open for this movie. Like, this story just never captured me whatsoever. So let's just jump right into the story. How'd you feel about Solo?
So, was the story boring, or was it bad? Absolutely.
A little bit of both.
No, in my opinion, it was not either of those. I thought it was pretty entertaining. There were some dry spots, but like I said in my broad strokes, my problem is it didn't hit all of the Han Solo beats I wanted it to, and it didn't do as much for the character of Han or Chewie like a movie like this needs to do. So what I mean by that is I didn't really buy Han and Chewie's friendship or relationship in this movie.
It was definitely rushed.
Yeah, it felt rushed. Like they just kind of connected, and that was that. Whenever you have such a close knit duo that we see in 4 movies, like that's what I wanted to see in this movie, was like, how do they become such best buds, and how do they become such bros, and it just happens in the movie. It for me, that was tough because I really wanted to see, like, that was the most interesting thing for me in this movie, was how do they meet, how do they become like so tight knit. And that's just an afterthought in this film. Like, well, we have to make Han and Chewie meet at some point, because obviously Chewie has to be in this movie, and we know what happens with them, but they don't do a good job of explaining why.
And we kind of talked a little bit about this off recording, but this movie feels like they were setting up a sequel. Like, that's what it feels like. And maybe we'll get more of that if and when they do make more of these solo movies. That's another reason why I was very disappointed in this movie. Well, very might be strong, but I was definitely disappointed in this movie because it felt like they didn't give us a whole movie, because it felt like they were just kind of holding some stuff back, like Chewie and Han, so they could possibly make more movies.
Yeah, but there's a point in the movie, and I don't want to spoil anything, but there's a point in the movie where Chewie makes a hard decision and decides to stay with Han instead of doing something that he really wants to do. And there's no emotional weight to that, and there's no really reason behind it. Like, I wouldn't buy, given what the brief things that they had gone through together, that he would want to stay with Han as opposed to doing that other thing. So just things like that, I felt like were rushed and didn't have enough weight. Another thing that I found myself really not caring about at all was the relationship between Han and Kira.
Yep.
Because we all know that he ends up with Leia, and we all love Leia, and we all love that relationship. So it was already going to be a really hard task to get me to care about an earlier relationship he was in, especially with as much weight as that carries throughout the story in the movie. It was never going to hit for me, because all of us, like, I would assume every Star Wars fan watching that movie could give 2 fucks about Kira, because we know that what happens, and we appreciate the character of Leia more. So that was another thing that I didn't really understand why it carried so much weight throughout the film. Because it just didn't seem necessary to me. I would have preferred them to be friends as opposed to in a relationship, because I think that would have made a little bit more sense. And then you talked about how this.
Hold on one second before you move on. I want to touch on this before I forgot about it. Do you think that they were banking on the fact that who's playing this character, and because she's so popular with the core audience, do you think that they were kind of banking on that?
Maybe, but I mean, I think she kind of proved her worth when Terminator Genesis bombed. Like, and that's nothing against Emilia Clarke. Like, I think she's a great actress, and of course she's like,
I think she does really well in this movie, by the way. We'll get into the performances here in a little bit. I think she does a really good job, but I have the same gripes about the character and the story and the motivation as you do.
Yeah, so I mean, I get it. Like, if you're going to write that character in this movie, you definitely have to make the decision to get an actress that people like.
For sure,
because it's going to be a hard character, but I don't think they ever make me like that character. And then, like I was saying, you mentioned that this seemed like it was setting up a sequel, and this might just be me, or this might just be something Tyler wanted, but I really did want to see Jabba and the stuff.
Yes,
between
absolutely.
him and Han, and obviously they set that up for a potential sequel, but those are the things that interested me most about the character. Like, when we meet Han in A New Hope, he has a bounty on his head, and he's trying to avoid Jabba, and that's the kind of stuff that I wanted to see the backstory to, and that's what I think is most interesting about the character. And obviously, it was just briefly touched on here. As far as like the good stuff, I will say that this movie added a lot of value for the character of Lando. Obviously, Lando's kind of a mysterious character in Empire and Jedi, but I really appreciated the brief backstory we got for him in this movie, and the moments that he had. And I'd also say that overall the pacing of the story was relatively good, and there weren't many dull moments. There were a couple dry spots, but it's not like I was falling asleep like you said you were. So yeah, I mean, there was good, but there was also some stuff that didn't really quite hit for me.
I felt when I got out of this movie, I felt like, again, going back to what I said with the broad strokes, is I felt like they just wanted to make a Han Solo movie and they didn't care so much about the story. And a lot of some of the beats in this movie just felt like excuses to kind of get to Solo's greatest hits, is what I'm going to call them. Of course, you gotta meet Chewie. You knew that was going to happen. That had to happen in this movie. They had to meet Lando. He had to win the Falcon. Like, those things had to happen. And the things that kind of put those things in motion just didn't feel as important to me. Like you said, there wasn't as many of those kind of greatest hits as I would have liked. I wanted to see Jabba, which we didn't. I just felt like everything else was just filler to get to those moments. And I know this is kind of an overgeneralization, but it feels like most of this movie, I mean, almost all of this movie, Han's motivation is doing whatever it takes to get back to his girl. And that's motivation that we've seen 1,000 times before in other films before. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It's just, that's okay if we understand how important the relationship is. But unfortunately, in this movie, we don't see enough of them in the beginning, literally and figuratively, because the scenes with them in the beginning is so fucking dark. It's hard to see anything that's happening in the fucking movie, which is a thing that I'm going to get to later. But in order for us to really fucking care about what's happening in this movie, is we have to care about that relationship. Because when you boil this story down to its foundation, you have to care about that relationship, and I just didn't feel that. And maybe that has something to do with what you mentioned, and I didn't make that connection, is I don't care because I know eventually he's going to end up with Leia. And maybe I just had that in the back of my head and I just didn't make that connection when I was thinking about it. And maybe that was their thought process. Maybe I'm not giving them enough credit, that they knew they didn't need to build up this relationship because they knew that people were going to be like, well, he's going to end up with Leia anyways. But for this movie, that's the foundation for this movie. And if I don't care about that relationship, I'm not going to care about the movie, because this entire movie is about him getting back to her. And if I don't care that he's getting back to her, I don't care about the movie.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. Like, you're right. That's the whole foundation of the movie, is his emotional tie to her, and I don't think that that's set up very well.
I mean, you basically only get about 15 minutes tops of them together on their home planet, and then that's it.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about the story is, at one point, episode 3, like, obviously Chewbacca's in episode 3 on Kashyyyk, and at one point there was going to be a young boy with Chewbacca, who of course would be Han, and they ended up not putting it in that movie for whatever reason. But I think that if it had been a story where Han was raised amongst the Wookiees on Kashyyyk, and he had that kind of tie to Chewbacca, as Chewbacca kind of raised him, and then they mentioned in this movie that all of the Wookiees were enslaved, and somehow Han and Chewie escaped and began kind of their life of smuggling. I think that is a more emotionally invested story than what we got. Like, I don't care about his time on what is it, Corellia? Is that?
Yeah, whatever. It doesn't. Coachella. Like, I don't know what they're fucking called.
Like, we don't even get to see much there, and it just, didn't really hit for me emotionally like a Star Wars movie should.
For sure, and hopefully they make more. Hopefully, I mean, I wasn't a huge fan of this movie, as you can probably already tell, but maybe if they make more, then they can build up that relationship, and so it doesn't feel so cheap in this movie. Like, if they have more than one film, another, they kind of span off and do their own, like, solo trilogy, because I know that you had mentioned that the actor, and I'm not going to try to pronounce his name again, even though I think I nailed it the first time, he has mentioned that he has signed on for 3 films. So if they do eventually make a solo trilogy, and they can build up that relationship, maybe this movie doesn't feel as cheap, but we're not reviewing it in retrospect. We're reviewing it right now. We only have this movie, and right now it feels cheap.
Yeah, I hope they do another one too, because it seems like the sequel to this movie would have all the stuff that I really wanted. So
absolutely.
We'll see. We'll see.
All right, so moving on to performances. This is actually where I think this movie did the best. Like I think they actually did a really good job. I mentioned earlier that the actor Alden Ehrenreich had to have some acting coaches come in, and I think he actually did a pretty good job. The problem is I never really saw him as Han Solo, though. I thought he did a good job, but because it's so close to how we see Han in A New Hope, I just can't envision that actor as that character. Like it's just, and that's just me growing up with Star Wars and seeing Harrison Ford as Han Solo, and this movie takes place so close to that. There's just no way that you can envision that person becoming Harrison Ford. Like, I think he does a good job, but as an actor in a movie, I just don't see him as that character. And so that's obviously a huge problem. I thought, obviously, and I'm not the only one that is thinking this, I think Donald Glover fucking nailed Lando, man. He was probably the best part of this movie for me. Like, I hear, as much as I don't see Han Solo in the other guy, I'm not going to say his name again, in the other guy, as soon as I heard Donald Glover as Lando, I was like, fuck, that's him. That's Lando. Like I heard, even in like the way that he talked, I was like, man, he fucking nailed it. So I love that part. So yeah, I will say that Woody Harrelson did have a moment in this movie. It's early in the movie. They're kind of doing their big first heist, and a character dies that we're supposed to care about, that Woody Harrelson's character cares about, that I don't fucking care about at all, but we're supposed to care about. And he like screams in like pain and like anguish. And I was like, oh, come on, Woody. Like, that was bad. That was really cringeworthy. But he's Woody Harrelson in this movie for the rest of the movie. Like, he's really good in this movie. Other than that one part, I just wanted to bring that up because it was really cringeworthy. And it's fairly early in the movie too. So I was like, oh no, like, please don't be bad in this movie.
Yeah. So, I mean, I agree. I think Alden Ehrenreich was good, but like you said, he had the cards stacked against him. Like, nobody was ever going to come out of this movie and say, like, oh my God, he reinvented the character and he's better than Harrison Ford. Like,
but I thought Donald Glover was pretty awesome. Like, I felt like maybe he didn't reinvent the character, but he nailed it.
Yeah, but that's the thing is, you know, one, Billy D is not Harrison Ford.
That's true.
Lando is not Han. We've seen Lando briefly in 2 movies, so like there's more you can do there with the character as opposed to, you know, one of the main characters in the Star Wars universe. So I agree, Donald Glover was amazing though. I feel like Paul Bettany was unexpectedly good in my opinion, even with him just coming in to take over that role during reshoots because the original actor that played him couldn't come back and do it. So I thought that him kind of getting thrown into that role, he was actually pretty good as the villain. Woody Harrelson was Woody Harrelson. So, yeah. You know, that anguish scream or not, like, you know, he doesn't really have a huge range. So he was fine. And then I know you said that you really liked Emilia Clarke as Kira. I thought that she was Emilia Clarke. Like, you know, I haven't really seen her do anything outside of the box either. Like, she was Daenerys in space. So,
but I enjoyed that though.
Yeah, that's fine. Like, I don't think she's bad, and me saying Woody Harrelson was Woody Harrelson doesn't mean he's bad.
Yeah,
it's just they didn't do a ton. So yeah, I mean, I would say the performances were all pretty good. You mentioned at one point that a robot was the most compelling character in Solo. Who voiced the robot?
Phoebe Waller-Bridge is her name. She's I think it's an Amazon exclusive show called Fleabag, and that's the only thing that I know her from. I think that's kind of her biggest role that I'm familiar with her. I only watched the first couple episodes. It never really captured me, but I've heard some really good things about it.
Yeah, that's an interesting choice for that character because obviously they got Alan Tudyk for K2SO and Rogue One, and it sounded like Tilda Swinton, but I knew she wasn't in this movie. So
I thought Kate Blanchett.
It sounded like Kate Blanchett too. That's another person who crossed my mind. So yeah. So anyways, performances were fine.
Oh yeah, for sure. So the last little bit that we'll talk about before we give it star rating is action, and I kind of already mentioned this a little bit, but I don't know if this is a product of the fact that they had to come back and kind of reshoot some stuff, and they changed a lot of this movie, but there was moments where it was literally hard to see what was going on because it was so dark in this movie, and that doesn't seem right to Star Wars. Like, that's not how a Star Wars movie should look like. It felt like, and this is going to be a super weird association, it's going to feel like a cheap plug for my gameplay videos, but like anytime I'm playing a game that I'm recording, my recording is always going to be like slightly darker than what I'm seeing, and so I have to like be careful with like when I'm doing Far Cry, like when there's a cutscene and it's super dark, like I have to be like paying attention to that before I start like setting up my recording or whatever. And it felt like this movie, people weren't paying attention to that because it was really, really hard to see what was going on in some of these scenes, especially early on. And I don't know, like I said, if that was a product of because they had to reshoot some of this movie, they had to make it a little bit darker to kind of make it feel. I don't know exactly how they go about reshooting it and recutting these movies, but it just kind of felt like they were maybe covering some stuff up by kind of making it super dark. I don't know. It was super, super weird. I don't understand why somebody wouldn't notice that and kind of be like, hey, maybe shoot it with more light. I don't know. It was kind of weird. The action itself didn't really hold my attention. Like I said, I was kind of having a hard time keeping my eyes open at certain points in this movie. I thought them on the Falcon was pretty cool, but other than that, I was a little disappointed with the action in this movie.
Yeah, I think we disagree here a little bit then. I thought the action was pretty good for the most part. Besides like the opening scene where there's a reason for the darkness, I didn't really have that same problem or notice it. I appreciated that we got to see Chewie do some like really cool hand-to-hand combat stuff.
Yeah.
Like it was pretty cool seeing him just sling people around like ragdolls, which was fun. I thought that the Kessel Run was probably one of the best spacecraft action scenes that we've ever seen in a Star Wars movie. So I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, I didn't have any issues with the action.
Yeah, I just felt like that it was just very generic. Like it felt like a very generic. I mean, I will agree with you. The Falcon stuff is pretty cool, but it just felt like a generic movie, like action movie. Especially the third act just felt, I don't know. Like I said, generic. I didn't want to use that word again because I had said it like 5 times in like 30 seconds. But yeah, that's like the perfect word for me. The third act, just the way they shot it too, felt like Ron Howard. So he must have had a huge hand in that third act because it was a lot of close-ups and stuff like that. Like I didn't feel the third act at all. All right, so star rating. So I have been hating on this movie a lot. But because it's a Star Wars movie, I feel like I kind of have to give it 3 stars just because we've already established that 3 stars means we recommend it. And I definitely think that people should see this movie, but just have your expectations super, super low.
Yeah. So I've been wrestling with my star rating for this movie since I saw it Friday night, and I've had a couple buddies text me and ask me what they thought of it and ask me what my star rating would be, and I've given different answers like almost every time somebody's texted me and asked me. So, whenever I got out of it, I thought 3 or 3.5, and then I talked to some people that really liked the movie, and they kind of made me appreciate it a little bit more, and I flirted with a 4. But I think at the end of the day, like even though I'm a fanboy for Star Wars and I'm going to forgive a lot, I'm going to have to go with a 3.5 on this one.
Okay. Before we get into nerd favorite, and I'll probably just put a special timestamp on this, I do want to talk about the big spoiler towards the end, and we kind of got a little bit into this discussion, kind of blew our load a little bit earlier before we started recording. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, again, just skip to nerd favorite because we're going to spoil it here in a second. But how'd you feel about Darth Maul being in this movie?
Yeah, so we talked about it a little bit before we started recording, like you said. Whenever he first showed up, I was kind of excited. I was like, oh my God, it's Darth Maul again. Like, that's pretty cool. But then as I started to let it sink in a little bit, I was like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. That's kind of fucking silly. But the thing about that and my Star Wars fandom is that I do not watch Clone Wars and I do not watch Star Wars Rebels. So I was talking to my stepbrother-in-law, and he was kind of explaining what the character did on those shows after he survived the fall in the fight with Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. And given what the character does in Clone Wars and Rebels, I will say that it makes a little bit more sense that he shows up as a crime syndicate or a crime boss or whatever you want to say in this movie. But yeah, I did end up forgiving it a little bit. I initially thought it was a little forced.
Yeah, so I feel a little bit more strongly as far as in the negative sense to this, because they just kept talking about it, so you knew eventually it was going to be a big character. They had to use a big character for it because they kept teasing it and were very mysterious about it. It couldn't just be some random character they invented for this movie, because then why keep it a secret? So
yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
I was going to say, I thought it was Jabba.
That's who I thought it was as well. But then they kind of have a line towards the end of the movie where they kind of make it where it's not Jabba. So it was like, okay, well, it can't be him. Who is it? And then when they reveal who it is, obviously the name makes sense of this crime syndicate that he's the head of. That kind of makes sense. But at the same time, like, I get what you're saying, that it makes sense with the character in those shows, and I also didn't watch those shows, so I'm not speaking firsthand, but that's what I've also heard. But that doesn't make it less stupid that he survived. Like, that's still stupid that he survived the fight. He got cut in fucking half. Like, that doesn't make it less stupid.
I mean, if you ever wanted to just cut to his soul, you would just be like, dude, you don't have a dick. So
does he have a robot dick? I know, like, at one point he had like spider legs or something like that in that show. Did he have like a spider dick?
Yeah, so I went back and I read about the show after I got out of the movie because I was curious about what he actually did on Clone Wars and Rebels, and they actually specifically say he does have a spider dick.
Okay.
So
it's so weird because when we reviewed Shape of Water, that episode title was called Fish Dick, obviously. So now this episode title has to be Spider Dick. So if somebody who doesn't listen to the podcast is just scrolling through our catalog, they're going to be very, very weirded out. Like, why are they so obsessed with like animal dicks?
Yeah, I don't know that I can be upset this year when we don't win a podcast award at any PopCon, because I mean, we had an episode. I don't even want to say that word on our podcast.
See you next Tuesday, Radar.
Yeah, we had an episode called that. We've had an episode called Fish Dick, now Spider Dick. Like, we don't deserve an award. So.
That's the thing. Like, I purposely put that as our episode for the podcast awards last year as kind of like a joke. I knew we weren't going to win. I obviously like our podcast. I think that we do a really good job, especially after the first like 30 episodes. If you can forgive those, I think that we've definitely found our groove. But those people were never going to give an award to a podcast that said cunt radar. And we say it like 17 times in that fucking episode, too. There was no way that they were going to give a podcast award to us. So I did something a little bit different this year. I think I just put forth our Ready Player One review because I thought that was a really good discussion. So I don't remember what that episode title was, but yeah, I doubt we're going to get it another award again, because they could just, within 2 clicks, look at our catalog and see Fish Dick and Cunt Radar again, and they'll be like, oh yeah, those are that guy. That's those guys. So yeah, we're definitely not going to get another award. But yeah, as far as that particular spoiler, I rolled my eyes. Literally, like, people say, oh, I rolled my eyes really hard. I legitimately rolled my eyes when that happened.
I will say I was legitimately surprised.
Yeah, I was somewhat surprised, yeah. I mean, I knew it was going to be a big character. I obviously didn't think it was going to be him, but I knew it was going to be a big character. So that part of it didn't surprise me. But when they finally had the reveal, I was just like, that's fucking stupid.
Yeah.
Again, it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier, is we need more of this, because the Chewie and Han relationship, but also the Darth Maul stuff, like, that has to be fleshed out.
Oh, for sure. Like, I would love to see a movie with Darth Maul as like a crime boss, and whether that involves Han or not, like I'd watch it. So
for sure. And that actually kind of leads me really well into a nerd favorite, and we didn't do that on purpose, I promise you. So my nerd favorite is going to be a little bit different this week. Is I kind of wanted to talk about what you want from, or what we want from a standalone Star Wars movie, and we've definitely touched on this already with our solo review. But the thing that was, I think, one of the most disappointing parts of this movie that we just reviewed is the fact that we don't see Jabba. I was hoping that was one of the greatest hits for me that we didn't see, and I was super, super disappointed in that. And I think that there's such a cool mythology around the Hutts. I think that you could have like this crime, like Sopranos-esque type of movie with Star Wars and the Hutts, because it's not just Jabba. There's all these other Hutts that they have, and in the mythology of Star Wars, and you kind of see that a little bit in the Star Wars comic, which I appreciated. And so I think that there's a really cool like Star Wars crime movie that you could do. I doubt that Disney would ever do it, because obviously it's Star Wars, and that would be kind of a niche audience for Star Wars, and it definitely wouldn't make money. I don't think it would even make Solo money, to be honest with you, but I think it would definitely be a cool idea.
yeah, I mean, I'd watch that movie. I like the character of Jabba. I don't know how, like, you'd have to surround him with cool characters because the character himself can't do much. But I think that Tatooine is a cool planet, and I would like to see stories on there, since it's like, a lot of crime lords and stuff like that. And the fact that there are so many desert planets apparently in the Star Wars universe that they're going to go to and say that aren't Tatooine is kind of silly to me. So I would love to go back to that planet. As far as like a spin-off movie I would like to see, I don't know. There's a few. Like I know people always say like Knights of the Old Republic would be a good one, or things back whenever there were a lot of Jedis, maybe even predating Episode 1. I don't know that I'd want to see that. This is a kind of a cop-out because it'd be very similar to Rogue One, but a line from the Star Wars movies that always intrigued me was in Return of the Jedi. Mon Mothma says many Bothans died to bring us this information to set up like the whole Battle of Endor.
Yeah.
I mean, you could do that, and like I said, it'd be very similar to Rogue One, but I would watch that movie. I mean, it would be directly tied to the original trilogy, kind of like Rogue One, so I'd imagine that I'd be more emotionally invested in it, and I think that you could definitely do some stuff that carried emotional weight. I mean, yeah, we know the characters are going to die, but I mean, we kind of knew that with Rogue One, and it was still really cool, so I think we could do that.
Did you ever play Battlefront 2?
The newest Battlefront 2?
Yeah.
No. I played the Battlefront 2 on PlayStation back in the day.
No, they do a Battle of Endor kind of behind the scenes stuff, but it's from the Empire's point of view. That's how the campaign actually starts, actually. So
that's dope.
Yeah, too bad the rest of the campaign felt like a Star Wars hack and slash, but that's beside the point. That's not what we're talking about. But yeah, I mean, that would be cool. I mean, we both really liked Rogue One, even though we knew how it ended. So yeah, if they could do that style of movie again with that particular line from Return of the Jedi, I still think that would be pretty cool.
For sure.
All right, so that's it for episode 191. I think this is probably one of our longer episodes that we had for a while, but it makes sense since we were reviewing a Star Wars movie. As always, we appreciate if you subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcatcher you use. We are on it. You can check out our website, thenerdpodcast.com, comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Nerds You're Looking For. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram. They're both at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Google+. Email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. And lastly, vote for us for Podcast of the Month at podcastland.com. For Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt.
we are The Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, guys.
Later, guys.